Good morning, vinyl community, crime community. Show a record here. Man of La Mancha. It's nice illustrations that they don't do by computers anymore. The artist is Hirschfeld. It's original. Is that did JFK like that record? Yes, he did. So I'm going to continue reading out the Library of Lies, a literary autopsy. In telling, for instance, that neither the Beatles nor Helter Skelter were mentioned in the first draft of Watkins' book, which dates from during the trial but before he gave evidence, both are present at his full strength in the published version, which is obviously based on the testimony he gave rather than his direct memories. Manson and others have frequently asserted that it was Watkins and Atkins rather than Manson himself who made a habit of Stone Beatle lyrics interpretation. The book was endorsed by BLC, which may have been a less than complete job of vetting the manuscript. My Life with Charles Manson contains the unintentionally revealing passage cited early in which Watkins described being put up in the Hyatt Hotel by mob lawyer Jake Friedman. That remains the only hint of the real background of the crimes in any of the former Mansonite memoirs. It may be that Watkins missed the significance of the crucial detail simply because he had nothing to do with the murders and was never in on the inner circle involved with Texas heavy-duty drug burns. Watkins' book is based on a bad lot due to the slightly higher ratio of honesty to cover-up, but he claims to have been chosen as Manson's right-hand man and designated successor is less than convincing. Watkins' willingness to help Bugliosi promote Helter Skelter in a 1974 publicity tour reveals the extent of the hypocrisy of the Manson book written by authorities involved with the many murders of the late crimes committed in the courtroom. The Garbage People, 1971, by John Gilmore and Rod Kenner, had some claims to being of somewhat higher plane than it contemplates in the field. Gilmore and Kenner, at least troubled themselves to engage in first-hand original research rather than relying on inaccurate newspaper accounts and false courtroom testimony. Interviews with many of the authentic voices of those involved with the Manson helped to elevate the Garbage People from the sensationalistic true crime approach usually taken. Mind you, the account of the crimes isn't inaccurate as that found in the rest of the standard literature. Still, the one sense that the authors were more sensitive to the larger aspects of the Manson phenomenon than the hacks responsible for most Manson product. Gilmore was something of a Hollywood bohemian insider, so he brings an informed approach to the subject. Manson said that this was the only one of the early books about him that he bothered to read all the way through. Considering the sub-Neanderthal intellectual level of which the biography of Manson's anti-literature is usually pitched, 1974 Our Savage God by R.C. Zachner is akin to coming up with a diamond among turds. The other Manson books get Manson's mystical simplicity ludicrously wrong. Zachner, a respected Oxford professor of comparative religion, is at least qualified to write about the study of the basis of genuine knowledge. Prior to this present volume, One Savage God was the only attempt to make sense of Manson and as a religious and philosopher figure. Zubner's guided experiment through these mescaline and legislative means of consciousness expanded allowed him to write about the psychedelic experience from his first-hand perspective. Though he ultimately rejected the spiritual value of psychoactive drugs, Zachner wrote several scholarly works on drugs and mystical experiences. Of course, Zachner is firmly anti-Manson, and many of his arguments are misguided since he assents to faith that Manson was responsible for ordering the Tate LaBianca murders. Nevertheless, Zachner was prerogative enough to notice that the similarities between Manson's oneness and nowness and the pre-Socrates mystical philosophers, Paramedes and Hercules, Hercules was recognized of how Manson's theology came from Carl Jung's aspects of the paradoxically terrible and unfathomable abraxam nature of the divine. Unfortunately, the only reference material this usually scrupulous scholar based his conclusions on were Sanders' rumor-ridden occult fantasy, The Family, and George Bishop's Witness to Evil. Like all the other books about the Manson phenomenon, Zachner dares to critique the hypocrisy of the public hysteria the case aroused, asking, if the victims have been a lot of lousy beggars and not a nickel of their pockets and only their lives to lose, would the Christian conscience of our clockwork scribes and Pharisees have woken up with such a shocking of panic fear? Ultimately, Zachner and Manson to argue this political case against European mysticism, which he wrongly assumed was a source of Manson's philosophy, even though he refuses Manson's spiritual worldwide view in favor of Aristotle's. Zachner grasps as well enough to observe that from the perspective of the perennial philosophy, Charles Manson is Mother Teresa, since all things are ever and eternally the same. Other two books about Manson sought to break away from the limitations of the true crime genre to consider the implications of the case from a philosophical standpoint. Also in 1974, Dr. David E. Cooper edited The Manson Murders, a philosophical inquiry. Dry, pandemic, and guilty of all the worst sins of academic abstraction, the viewpoints collated are based on the false premises and other no official insight into the crimes. Never straying from the time-worn cliche of secular humanistic psychological prattle, Dr. Carol Livesey's interviews and analysis of the Manson women, 1980, mostly misses the mark. Lively does differ radically from the other authors in that she rejects the Manson brainwashing legend. Based on her pious visits with Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten, Lively concludes that the three followers were fully capable of carrying out their own crimes on their own volition. Since none of Charlie's Angels designed to tell Lively when the crimes were really all about, you can't blame the probably well-intentioned author of making the usual wrong turns in her undertaking. The understanding Manson's remark that Lively's sites sheds a small poignant of light on Texas' commanding role in the crimes falsely blamed on Manson. I don't have anything to do with Leslie Van Houten. She was Texas' girl. When I was there, Leslie was Bobby's girl. Sir Winnaskowski's Charles Manson's love affairs with a street disciple, 1976, also takes a psychological approach, examining the police confiscated correspondence between a young girl and her hero as a way of coming to grips with Manson's charismatic appeal. It's noteworthy for allowing Manson's unedited voice to speak for itself. A rarity of the most of the other offerings tend to rely on quoting Manson through distorted and hostile secondhand sources. Love Needs Care, 1971. David E. Smith's History of the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic is an interest since it touches on Manson's frequent visits to the August institution during his San Francisco period. Smith's co-author of the group Marriage Committee, a case study called earlier on the friendly terms with Manson and his circle, published at a time when the media's demonstration campaign was at its height. Smith offered one of the few, at least particularly balanced accounts of Manson from someone that he actually knew him. We have already dealt in passing with this book, misleading titled Manson in His Own Words, as told by Neil Emmons, and it was troubled by Grove Press in 1986, with long-awaited many years in the making. Pseudo-autobiography came as a major disappointment. It would be hard to make the story of Manson's life dull, but somehow Emmons and his editors of Grove Press merged to produce a colorless account. The entire book lacks the passion, drama, or humor that most unexpected letters from Manson expresses. Much of what is passed off in the volume as Manson's own words are clearly nothing of the kind. Manson denounced Edmonds' work as bullshit, editing that the book sure blew up in my face. Lynette Fromey observed that Edmund tried to make Manson too normal. Certainly more of the words Edmonds his editors put in Manson's mouth are too socially convenient to be believable. Perhaps the lackluster result is due to the fact that the book wasn't motivated by any burning desire on Manson's part to tell his own side of the original mangled tale. It was simply the result of a favor according to criminal etiquette from one convict to another. In fact, Manson once told me that Manson, in his own words, came about the same way that Cielo Drive murders happened. Just as Tex once owed Manson now owed Edmonds. The favor had been hanging around a long time before it was finally cleared. In 1956, Manson was only 21, met Edmonds when they were both doing a time in Terminal Island. Edmonds was serving a sentence for interstate transportation of stolen property. As Edmonds told U.S. Magazine in 1982 interview, both cons were released in 1957. Manson hit the streets as a pimp, Edmonds recalled, and I opened up an auto body shop. One day Manson wrecked a car and was worried about violating parole. So I fixed his car and lent him some money. In 1960, I was back in prison, and sure enough, Manson showed up. 2. So he owed me the money, but I never asked him for it. In jail, there's an unwritten code that you never hit a man when he's down. Through Manson, in his own words, the debt was paid. As Manson put it, Edmonds wrote a book about Edmonds, and he put Manson on it. He milked you people. He cheated you. He's a good crook. He's made a lot of money. And in the early 80s, Edmonds visited Manson at Vacaville, heavily medicated against his will by prison officials. Manson reluctantly agreed to participate in Edmonds' project. At the very least, Edmonds' own convict background allowed him to ground Manson's criminal career into something like down-to-earth reality. However, in the process of demystifying his subject, Edmonds threw the baby out with the bathwater. The very factors that make Manson our unique figure of cultural significance, his mystical understanding, his creative use of language, his radical ideological vision, his music, his critique of society, are all conspicuous by their absence. Of the few passages that ring true, Manson's own realistic assessment of his legendary criminal career bears repeating here. Speaking of the extravagant myth he's been saddled with, he said, "True is, the load is too heavy to carry this many years. I want out from under it. I have never been anything but a half-assed thief who I didn't know how to steal without getting caught. The only home I've ever known is the one, these concrete and steel prisons. You have to look for yourself, and now I was raised what I actually am and what all you printed words have made me. I am not sorry or ashamed of who I really am. I am not sorry of the myth of Manson that you, newspapers, books, and television kept putting in front of your faces. My disappointment is that so many of you are so gullible that you can eat everything that you are fed." The early interviews with Edmonds about the work in progress, he promised to systematically explode all of the nonsense in Boyosi's Helter Skelter. While what remains to have been his sincere akin, the curiously delusory book that finally appeared, is simply too scant on detail to deliver. Edmonds told me in 1987 of his own disappointment while the finished product and spoke of plans to reveal facts about the crimes which Grove Press deemed too hot to handle. In future projects, they were never realized. All in all, a raised opportunity to provide the real story from the only person credible of telling it. When it comes to mind-twisting Manson's mysticism, Maury Terry, The Ultimate Evil, published in 1987, may be the worst offender of all. Since 1970, The Second Coming of Art Lyons, fantasies trading on the supposedly satanic occultism of the Manson family, has been featured in a host of sensational screeds and modern witchcraft and the dangers of cults. Terry's best-selling hardcover book brought these paranoid horror stories to their wildest audiences by mixing the occult angle with the popular interest in serial killers that erupted in the 1980s. His timing was perfect. America was going through many of the witch hunt fevers, but this time, instead of searching our reds under the bed, right-wing militias, or Islamic planting dirty bombs, the hunt was on for the real witches, as was the age, socialists, and scholars of the popular Delusions of crowds has since termed the Satanic Panic. Right-wing Christians, fundamentalists, law enforcement personnel force their medieval vision of an entirely non-existent occult crimes wave on a gullible public. The specter of Charles Manson was retrieved from the permissive and revolutionary 60s era, whose apostles of Reaganite vicissitude were hated as a convenient scarecrow, ready-made to increase the desired mass media-induced mass panic. Tabloid TV, the opium of the people before the World Wide Web, took its place as the favorite electric addiction and urban remover monger, obliged by stroking the fire of fear. Into the already hysterical atmosphere, Maury Terry irresponsibly revived many of the libelous claims against the process church in the final judgment, which Ed Sanders had disseminated in the family. Now that the litigious process was defunct, Terry felt free to add his own far-fetched fantasies above their supposed dire occult influence on Manson to Sanders' lurid scenario of secret snuff sex. The Terry's ridiculous notion of Manson as a diabolical agent of a worldwide satanic conspiracy, a cabal who's supposedly responsible for the Son of Sam serial killings, makes Sanders look responsible by comparison. Every page reveals Terry's complete ignorance of the occult tradition of which he claims to have inside knowledge. In the ultimate evil, Terry takes the already overblown Manson myth and brings it into the same zany X-Files fantasy universe in which the Illuminati, the Black Sun, and the Elders of Zion plot world domination from Area 51. What's worse, many of Terry's more trusting readers believed his erratic nonsense and have expanded on it. What's been missed about Terry's book, as absurd as it is that it actually touches in passings of some little exploit facts about the Cielo Waverly crimes that deserve more serious study. Terry even dates to gingerly suggest that the Bugliosi might be not completely correct about the motives of the LaBianca murders. Unfortunately, these few genuinely worthwhile leads have nothing to do with the devil worship angle Terry harped on and were almost entirely obscured by the ultimate evil's grievous faults. Terry himself didn't quite grasp the meaning of what he mentioned, since he so blandly put his focus on the irrelevant occult machinations that exist only in his brain. For instance, Terry claims to have knowledge of a friendship between Abigail Folger and Manson, something Charlie had revealed to me in detail in 2012. His details didn't exactly account with what I was told from the horse's mouth, but there's enough ring of veracity to the section of Terry's otherwise fictional expertise and paranoia. Considering the social resonance and commercial appeal of Manson's phenomenon, surprisingly few major authors have turned to this subject. Perhaps the lurid nature of the media coverage scared them away. The few exceptions to this rule have tended not to focus on Manson himself, but on the stories of the case. Joan Didion, who was at the Buddhist party with Steve and Gary Hinman, but we won't talk about that. Joan Didion's concise essay of the White Album is a moody meditation of the hysterical zeitgeist of post-Cielo Drive, California. Didion befriended Linda Kasabian when she was friends with Gary Hinman already. That's not correct, is it, to do that? Under still unexplained circumstances during the trial, and was in position to delve deeper, but her equally sharp journalistic acumen and eye for corruption failed her here. Like so many others, Didion accepted Kasabian's version of events without asking any probing questions about the obvious inconsistencies in her testimony. A recent biography of Didion more than suggests that she was aware of how much Bugliosi downplayed the narcotic trafficking background of the crimes. I would say this is absolutely friggin' true because she knew Gary Hinman. Nonetheless, the White Album remains an atmospheric time capsule of the spirit of '69, worth reading as long as one reads between the lines. Truman Capote, analogy, music of Chameleon includes Then It All Came Down, Capote's flirtatious interview with the rough trade Bobby Beausoleil, conducting in a San Quentin prison cell Unfortunately, the pill-popping author of In Cold Blood was well past his prime by this time. The self-indulgent exercise promises to be a look into the real mystery case of the case, but actually consists of Capote showing off to Beausoleil. As is typical of the way the Manson phenomenon is handled, Capote, usually a meticulous researcher, lazily allows for several elementary errors of fact. These include such misspellings as Loeb, Bianca, and Van Houten. Capote rejects the helter-skelter scenario, preferring to believe that, as he writes, it was out of devotion to Bobby Beausoleil that Tex Watson and his cutthroat young ladies sallied forth on their satanic errands. Even when Beausoleil tells his outright that Sharon Tate and the gang died because they burned people in dope deals. Excuse me. The self-righteous crime buster, Capote lecturing him by insulting. The truth is, the Biancas and Sharon Tate and his friends were killed to protect you. Beausoleil says that Capote misquoted him and disputes the essay validity. Capote was always had an ambitious relationship with the truth, claimed to have invented a new kind of writing called the nonfiction novel. To be charitable, that may be the best way to describe all the Manson canon we've considered so far, and all the supposed facts related to the above are nothing more than an authorial fantasy based on the true story. We're going to end here now, and this is going to go on about more of the stories that were written and wrote and read post and pre-trial by Sanders and Bugliosi and the New York Times Magazine and LA Times and a whole bunch of people. So if you joined my stream today, like and subscribe, and we will continue on. God bless the children.